Hello everyone, good afternoon. So, here we are going to read the novel, which is a very famous classic novel named The Secret Garden. So, let's start. 9-year-old Mary Lennox is an unattractive girl in both body and mind. Her father is a government official in India, and her mother, though beautiful, cares more about party than her younger daughter. To keep Mrs. Lennox happy, the family Indian servants must keep Mary from disturbing her mother and out of view of her friends. The servants indulged Mary's every whim, and Mary quickly became selfish and tyrannical. One day, a cholera epidemic breaks out. As people fall ill, the household devolves into a state of panic. Mary, forgotten by both her family and the servants, hides in her nursery. When she awakens the next day, the house is silent. After several hours, a group of soldiers discovers Mary. From them, she learns both her parents have died. Mary is sent to England to live with her uncle, Archibald Craven. His housekeeper, Mrs. Madolk, meets Mary in London. Together, the two travel to Yorkshire. Along the way, Mrs. Medlock tells Mary more about her uncle, who is a hunchback, about his and about his home. Misselthwaite Manor, the ancient house, stands on the edge of moor, and almost all of its 100 rooms are kept locked. Mr. Craven's beautiful wife died young, and the man became near hermit in his grief. The next morning, at the manor, Mary wakes up to find a young maid tending her fireplace. The maid, Martha, chats with Mary as if she were her equal, which irritates the spiteful little girl. Martha manages to soothe her, Mary, by telling her about her brother, Dickon, who has an affinity with animals. Listening to Martha talk about Dickon, Mary feels an interesting in something outside herself for the first time in her life. Martha also tells Mary that somewhere on the estate grounds there is a garden that has been locked up for 10 years. Outside in one of the kitchen gardens, Mary spies on a robin. The robin's happy song makes her feel less surely than normal. In another garden, she meets a grumpy old gardener named Ben Witherstaff. When she tells him about Robin, Ben whistles a song, and to Mary's surprise, the robin reappears. Ben explains that Robin befriended him after becoming separated from the rest of his brood. Mary realizes all at once that she too is lonely. The robin resumes singing, and Ben tells Mary this means the bird has decided to befriend her too. Mary lives begin to settle into a routine. Every day she wakes up, has breakfast, and goes to wander the garden. Slowly, her time spent outside begins to have a positive effect. She begins to move less sickly and grows stronger. One of the evening, Mary asks Martha about the locked garden again. Martha explains that the garden belonged to Mrs. Craven, who spends hours there with her household. Mrs. Craven loved to sit on the branch of a particular tree. One day of the branch broke and she fell. When she died from her injuries, Mr. Craven locked the garden up and buried the key. Suddenly, Mary hears sounds like a child crying. Martha insists it is only the wind, but Mary doesn't believe her. The next day, the rain keeps Mary indoors. She explores the house for several hours. On her way back to her room, Mary again hears a child crying. As she searches for the house of the sound, she runs into Mrs. Medlock, who drags Mary back to her room and tells her to stay there. Martha's go home for the daily visit to her family. After she leaves, Mary goes out the garden where she finds Ben Weatherstaff in a good mood for once. He tells her that spring is coming soon. As she resumes her wandering, Mary thinks about how she grown fond of Martha and the robin. This is a new experience for her, as she never liked anyone before. She hears the robin twittering and goes toward the flower bed where he is hopping around. There, next to a hole dug in the earth by a dog, Mary finds an old key. She thinks "Mm, must be the key of the locked garden. The thought of getting inside the log garden excites Mary. Imagination. She decides to keep the key with her all time in case someday she would find the door. The next morning, Mary receives a present from Martha's mother, a jump rope. As Mary practices her skipping, she receives the robin perched on a piece of ivy on a wall. All gust of wind blows the ivy, and Mary suddenly glimpses a doorknob. Digging under the ivy, Mary finds the door's lock. She takes the key from her pocket, puts in the keyhole, turns it, and pushes the door open. The inside of the walled garden is filled with rose bushes of all kinds. Though Mary is unsure if they are dead or alive, looking at the flower bed, Mary sees some green shoots poking out of the earth. Happy that something is in the garden is growing, she decides to lend the baby plants a hand by clearing the weeds. That night, she asks Martha to help her purchase some gardening tools. Martha agrees to the plan, telling Mary they can ask the deacon to help Mary make a garden. As Martha leaves the room, Mary hears the same crying sound as she heard before. For the next week, Mary spends each day working inside the garden. She also becomes better friends with Ben, who tells us he learned about Rose care from a young lady, now deceased, who had loved them. Afterward, Mary wanders into a small wooden plot. There, she sees a strange boy sitting against a tree, playing a pipe, surrounded by a squirrel, two rabbits, and a peasant. He introduces himself as Dickon and shows Mary the tools and seeds he has bought for her. Suddenly, they hear the robin singing. Dickon whistles back to the bird in a way that sounds almost like the ribbon's own twitter. Listening to the robin's reply, Dickon confirms for Mary that the robin is a friend. He then asks Mary about the location of her garden. After a brief hesitation, Mary takes Dickon to the local garden and lets him inside. Mary asks Dickon if he thinks the rose bushes are dead or not. He examines them and tells her that there is a lot of dead wood to remove. He sees new growth as well. He also remarks on Mary weeding work, praising her impulse to give the flowers room to grow. Mary asks if he will help her to return the garden to its former glory, and Dickon agrees. Mary tells Dickon she likes him and asks in Yorkshire dialect if he likes her too. His confirmation makes Mary gladder than ever. A bit of earth. That day after lunch, Mary learns her uncle has returned from his recent travel and has asked to see her before he leaves again. In Mr. Mary's, once in Mr. Trevin's presence, Mary studies him carefully. His back is indeed uneven, but he's not ugly, only very sad. When he apologizes for having failed to send Mary a governess, Mary asks also that she's allowed to play outside and grow stronger before having a governess. Mr. Craven says that is the exact advice Martha mother, Mrs. Sawberry, offered, and he agrees Mary may continue to as he wishes for the time being. Mary then asks if she can have a piece of land for garden. Mr. Craven is surprised, moved by her request. Mary desires reminder of his wife love growing things. He tells her that she can have much land as she likes anywhere on the grounds. The night, as Mary lies in bed listening to the rain, Mary again hears the sound of someone crying. She goes in search of the source of the noise. Finding the room, Mary opens the door. Inside, she sees a frail looking boy lying in bed. The two children stare at one another, each wondering if other is a ghost. After a few moments, they introduce themselves. The boy is Colin Craven. Mary, shocked, tells Colin, who has no idea uncle had a son. Colin explains that he's been sick ever since he was born and probably won't live. And if he does, he will be a hunchback. Even his father only sees him when he's asleep. He never goes outside, and Colin adds, normally he never lets people see him. And everyone has to obey him since getting angry makes Colin more ill. Colin asks Mary her age. She replies she's 10 and that she knows he is because that when Mr. Craven locked up the garden, Colin begins peppering Mary with questions about the secret garden. To distract him, Mary asks Colin if he really believes he will die young. He tells her that what people say. Colin returns to the subject of the secret garden, insisting he wants to see it and make the servants show it to him. Mary, thinking fast, explains that Colin must not do that. If he does, the garden wouldn't be a secret any longer. Colin, who has never had a secret, is convinced. He tells Mary he wants her to come back and talk to him every day. The next morning, Mary tells Martha she has met Colin. Martha worries she will lose her job, but Mary assures her Colin was happy to meet her. Martha is the only used to Colin tantrums and tears, can hardly believe what she hears. When Mary asks Martha about Colin's illness, Martha says that her mother thinks Colin is sickly mainly because he lies in bed all day long. Later, Mary returns to Colin's room. Colin's talk quickly returns to the subject of his illness. The person who ever questioned the idea of his dying young, Colin tells Mary was a specialist from London. He thought Colin could get well and live if Colin decided that he wanted to. Thinking about this, Mary wonders if meeting Dickon might help him Colin to want to live. She begins to describe Dickon, his family, and the gardens and the mood to Colin. Soon Colin forgets about being sick and he and Mary are laughing happily together. Suddenly, Colin's uncle, Dr. Craven, and Mrs. Medlock enter. They are shocked to see Mary, but Colin announces he and Mary are now friends and she will visit him whenever she wishes. When Dr. Craven tells Colin to remember is not well, Colin retorts that Mary makes him better by helping him forget the exact fact. After a week of rain, the sunshine returns and Mary goes back to the garden. There, Deacon introduces her to a fox named Captain, a crow named Suit. Mary tells him about Colin. Dickon says Colin's best chance to get well is spend time outdoors, and the two discuss bringing Colin to the garden. When Mary returns to the house, Martha reminds her to Colin is waiting to see her, but Mary is unconcerned and says he will go to him later. That evening, when she goes to the Colin, she finds him in a terrible mood. He tells Mary if Dickon is going to keep her away from all day, he will banish him with from Misselwaite. A bitter argument ensues, each call the other selfish, and then Colin tries to remind her he is going to die. Mary tells him she doesn't believe him. Enraged, Colin orders her to get out of the room. The night Mary is awakened by the sound of Colin having his tricks. Mary runs into Colin's room and begins yelling at him, demanding to stop his tantrum at once. If he doesn't, she warns she will start screaming too, and she will do it even louder. Colin, shocked out of his wit, moans to Mary that he felt a lump on his back. Mary demands to see Colin's back, and upon sees announces that it is perfectly straight. Colin, astounded by the pronouncement, begins to wonder if perhaps he is not sick after all. The next morning in the garden, Mary asks Dickon if he would come to visit Colin and bring some of his animals with him. Dickon agrees. Later, in Colin's room, Mary describes her time with Dickon. When Colin remarks that he's never had a friend because generally he doesn't like people, Mary tells him she used to feel the same but doesn't anymore. She tells him Dickon will visit soon and seeing his happiness finally confesses she's been inside the secret garden and plans to take Colin there. When Dr. Craven arrives the next day to check Colin, he is shocked to see his tantrum appears to have no ill effects. Mrs. Medlock replies that her friend Mrs. Sowerby says children need to spend time with other children to learn that they aren't the center of the universe. Dickon and his animals arrive to meet Colin. In addition to two squirrels, Nut and Shell, Scoot and Captain, Dickon brings a baby lamb he's fostering. Soon the three children are chatting with like old friends. On the day Collins is to venture outdoors, he orders that all the manor staff stay away from the garden path. Pickett pushes Collins around the ground in a wheelchair. Collins is delighted with the sights, sounds, and smells of the natural world. Finally, they reach the secret garden. Inside, Collins' pale skin begins to show a flush of color for the first time, and he announces to his friends that he will indeed get well and live. Suddenly, the children spy Ben standing on a ladder looking over the wall. Colin asks if Ben knows who he is and caught off guard. Ben's reply refers to Colin as a cripple. This roses Colin's temper. Gasping Dickens' hand, Colin rises from the wheelchair and stands on his own leg. He then orders Ben to come to join them in the garden. Once Ben arrives, he tells the children he used to work in the garden once a year, each year as a honoring of Colin's mother, who loved it so. Colin replies that he is now his garden, but he will allow Ben to keep visiting if he keeps it a secret. In the months that follows, the garden blooms. Colin decides that he will become a scientist and will start with a story of magic in the world. As his first experiment, he will call on the magic to make him well. He, Dick, and Mary and Ben sit in a circle under a tree, and Colin chants that his wish over and over. Then he walks around the garden. Colin decides not to tell the doctor or anyone else about his growing strength until he is completely well. When that happens, he will surprise his father. One afternoon, Mrs. Strawberry appears in the secret garden door. The children welcome her with joy, and she in turn treats Mary and Colin like her own children. As they all talk about love and together, Colin inquires whether she believes magic. She says she does, though she calls it by names. Before she departs, Mrs. Strawberry says she hopes Mr. Craven will return home as soon as how well Colin has become. And Colin replies that he wishes she will really his mother as well as Dickens. Mrs. Strawberry assures Colin that his own mother spirit lives in the garden. While good thoughts help people flourish, bad ones like prison, even since his wife's death, Mr. Craven has allowed grief full control of his mind and has returned from his responsibilities at home. That is until one day, as he's sitting outdoors next to a lake clump and blue flower catches his eyes, he finds himself marveling at the loveliness and for the moment. The darkness retreats. Some nights later, he dreams about his wife. She tells him to find her in the garden. The next morning, when he receives a letter from Miss Strawberry advising that he come home, Mr. Craven packs his bags. On the trip home, Mr. Craven finds himself thinking deeply about his son for the first time in years. Mr. Craven describes he must try to improve his and Colin's relationship. He sets off looking for Colin as soon as he arrives home. As he approaches the secret garden, he's shocked to hear what sound like children's voices inside. Suddenly, garden door swings open and Collins runs out, stumbling straight into his father's arm. Mr. Craven is overcome with joy at the sight of his son. Colin shows his father around the garden and tells him all his adventures here. Colin, Mary, and Mr. Craven will walk back to the manor together, where the entire house is utterly surprised and delighted to see the father and son. So, this is the summary of the first book I have read, which is The Secret Garden by Francis Hodgson Burnett. It is the first edition or in 1911. It is a classic novel, and yes, for more such classic novels, keep updating. And yes, this channel is for also for novels, magnas, web novels, whatever you like to read. I'll be reading it, and also this will be open for any chat discussion uh, henceforward. So my timing will be around 2 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday. This is the first installment, and it will be continued furthermore. And yes, please do subscribe our channel and keep watching.